In this video, I want to encourage you to take your healing seriously, to double down on it so that you can heal. And I'm going to lay out 10 things that you can do if you're ready to move forward with that. All right. Now, obviously, not all of these will apply to you, but these are the 10 things that worked for me. And I'm going to tell you what they were. And when you've heard everything that I'm going to explain to you about them, you can pick one or two. You can pick the most important ones. And I would encourage you to take the ones that are causing you the most pain, but also that are actually fixable for you right now. Pick things that you can win at as your first goals. You might be able to hear there's like 3 chainsaws going outside right now. It's a full-on Texas Chainsaw Massacre out there. So I think they're going to be like using those all day. There's not really anything I could do about it. And I wanted to tape this video anyway because I wanted you to have it. So number 1, you can do this one. Learn what complex PTSD is. Not just what you've heard on the internet, not just what other people say about it, and not focusing all your energy on what might be the diagnosis of the people who hurt you. That's not the same thing as understanding what's going on with your brain. Learning about your brain, about dysregulation and what that does for you, emotional regulation, and then when you have a sense of yourself, then it's a great time to start learning what other people did to heal. Number 2, when you look at yourself and how you're doing, be willing to notice some of the problems that maybe have nothing to do with trauma. Now, it's true, CPTSD can make it hard to focus. It can make it hard to be consistent, to be kind and considerate as you want to be. It might make it hard to stay present. It might have damaged your relationships. It might have damaged your health. Okay, so all those things are out there. But everybody has a couple problems that are just kind of ordinary human problems. So it could be something like maybe you're often late. A lot of people struggle with that. You don't have to be traumatized. Trauma could be implicated in that. But sometimes that's one of the things that you just have. And the reason I love the problems that are just kind of like normal person problems is because they're a little easier to solve. You don't have to heal your brain necessarily to get that going. It could be that you need to keep your kitchen cleaner, that the whole kitchen like smells like garbage all the time, and when people come over, you're ashamed. I know how trauma can drive that kind of thing, but it's a problem that anybody might have, and it's a solvable problem. I love low-hanging fruit problems, things that you can solve quickly and get a little win. Number 3, prepare to move your stories about the abuse and neglect that happened to you out of present time looping thoughts and into what I call the memory bucket. If you can imagine, there's a bucket. So it's a different thing, isn't it, when something that happened in the past is still activated in your mind and you get emotions every time you think about it. You might start crying, or you might fill up with adrenaline and your heart pounds. It might scatter your thoughts. So that's what I call an electric thought, and it's activated. When a memory goes into the memory bucket, it's deactivated. You can remember it. If anybody asks you a question about it, you can remember all the same details about it, but it doesn't trigger this huge physiological and neurological response in you. So it's the memory bucket. So when I say get ready, one thing you could do is start to write about it, to start being truly like open-minded that you could be okay without this. And if you feel anxious at the thought of like surrendering your fear and resentment about the world, I would just say do it a tiny bit at a time. Do a little bit at a time and see what happens, and just see if when you surrender fear about something, does it incapacitate you? Does it make you a doormat? It's not been my experience that it does. In fact, it makes me more empowered. It makes me more clear about when something dangerous is in my presence, when I need to act on it. So you can try that for yourself, little bits. All right. Number 4 is stop trying to make other people not trigger you. All right. So if you get very triggered by people, and pretty much everybody with complex PTSD gets triggered by people, and that's what makes people hard. That's what makes us have a tendency to want to isolate or keep people at arm's length. Those interactions get so triggering. So there's a misunderstanding that if we could just get other people to stop behaving the way they do, or saying what they say, or making us feel the way we feel, then we would be okay. And sometimes that's true, but it's usually not true that you even could, that they could stop triggering you even if they wanted to with all their hearts. The central problem is that we get triggered. The empowered approach is to maintain your control over that, to learn to calm your triggers. Now, when you can learn to calm your triggers, for one thing, you're not so triggered, and you become perceptive, and you can begin to tell if someone in your presence who's been hard for you to hang around Are they actually a great big problem for you, or are they okay? It's just that you have triggers. That's called discernment. That's one of the biggest things that we lose with CPTSD is that ability to discern. There's so much confusion walking around like, is it just me or is this person a real jerk? And you can begin to have discernment about that. And what a relief. What a relief to be clear. Like, this person doesn't belong in my life. This person I love. They're awesome. And I'm going to make this relationship better and safer for them by calming my triggers. All right. So you have the power to do that. The other great thing about learning to calm your triggers is that you become flexible. You become able to hang out with a variety of different people. You can be in all kinds of circumstances. You don't have to be so particular and have so-called boundaries about, I don't do this, I don't eat that, I never let people say this, I can't stand hearing it. You know, you can start to be flexible and just sort of let life happen around you and be discerning about it, mostly okay with it, but knowing when it's time to step out of a situation if you need to, have a boundary, right? When you can do that, CPTSD gets held back here. If you have calm triggers, it cannot get the better of you, because that's basically what it is. All the bad things that come with CPTSD, the cognitive, the memory, the relationship problems, right? The health problems, the headaches, the stress, all of that can't get activated if you don't get triggered. So there's your superpower, okay? If you were to do one thing, just start bringing it in and learn how to notice when you're triggered and bring it down. Now, learning to notice dysregulation and a triggered state in ourselves, that's a huge piece of what I teach in my 8-week coaching intensive. And that's a program that I teach now and then. You may have seen it. And we go all the way through, you know, what happened, dysregulation, triggers, disconnection from people, self-defeating behavior, learning to own our healing. And finally, in like the 8th week, we're working on bringing your talents into your life. All the stuff that was suppressed by all the stuff earlier in the chain where you were too dysregulated to connect with people or do what you're capable of doing. The point of our healing, it's not just to feel better. You do have to feel better. You do need that. You deserve it. But when you do feel better, the real point of healing can begin. And that's you becoming yourself and delivering the gifts that you have to bring to the world. All right. If you're interested in that coaching program, that'll be down there with all the things down below in the description section. All right, number 5, this one's kind of high-level Jedi stuff. Stop trash talking the people who you choose to have in your life. It's very common for people who don't have CPTSD to just throw labels. You know, they're a narcissist, they're toxic. But if you really want to heal, if you want to double down on your healing, I encourage you to stop using those labels on people and instead just start noticing whatever you call it, the thing that other people do or have that's so troubling for you, the thing you're focusing on your healing is the way that you get troubled, the way that your emotions rise up or you get dysregulated, right? That's the part. That's the part where you actually have influence over what happens next. So whatever you want to call them, if you've ever had luck telling somebody, hey, you're a narcissist, I think you really ought to read this book or something, that never works. You probably noticed that. It never works. People are going to be people. Now, you don't have to keep these people in your life. The more you recover, the more you're going to get clear about who should stay and who should go. But focusing on yourself is always going to be your superpower. Focusing on, oh, this is where I get triggered. Because if you get triggered around somebody who is, I don't know, a psychopath, you're going to be really defenseless against whatever harm they're going to do to you. You want to be grounded. You want to be lucid, clear-headed, clear-eyed, perceptive, so that you can make good decisions about how to proceed when somebody begins to treat you badly. And if somebody's treating you really well, of course, you want to be at your best. You want to be able to open your heart and enjoy that relationship. Number 6, stop clinging to bad relationships that make you miserable. Now, I got to bring this in any discussion of what it means to double down on your healing. Staying in bad relationships and hemorrhaging all your energy and your cognition to a situation where you're fighting all the time, you're being treated in an abusive manner, you're being disrespected, you're sad all the time. It's going to be really hard to heal your life in those circumstances. So I understand there are relationships where there's an obligation, a duty. If you have children who are minors, if you, for the time being, have no financial means to get out, and I mean none, because I really think that living humbly is a lot better than staying in an abusive situation. Or if these are parents or family members who, have dementia, and even though they're treating you badly and it's miserable, you're honoring them by caring for them and making sure they're cared for. All right, so I'm going to set that aside. I'm not really talking about situations that are complicated by duty and promises. I'm talking about things like boyfriends and girlfriends who don't treat you well and who suck the life out of you and who are going to prevent you from moving forward with your healing. All right. Number 7 is the same thing, but for jobs. Don't stay in work that makes you miserable unless your life depends on it. There are times when we all got to do what we got to do to get the paycheck, right? But not forever. Don't let that be forever. And if the paycheck is not the problem right now, I want you to ask yourself, is being miserable at work the way that you avoid facing responsibility for your life? And I talk about this very directly because it's something that I've had to face myself too. There was a lot of time when I was still at the effect of CPTSD where if I weren't miserable, I would have to notice immediately that there was this giant hole in my life where close relationships were supposed to be. That I had superficial relationships. I was getting my self-esteem off the fact that I had a job, but I was not happy. And I didn't like the way I was treated. And I stayed years working for an awful boss, years. And then I bounced around to a couple of awful bosses. The problem was in here. The problem was in the work that I was accepting for myself, in my unwillingness to make changes and to do the growth and the learning that was going to be necessary for me to take that step up. And it's hard. And I had to do it as a single mom. I ended up completely unemployed as a single mom. And I just want to say, I realize I don't have the worst problems that anybody's ever had, but to a large degree, if I could do it, if I could get going and create a way to make a living that suited me and that was a respectful, self-loving, creative, enjoyable kind of work for myself, I just think a lot of you can too. And for those of you who have other extenuating circumstances that are keeping you stuck, feel the truth of what I'm saying. Let it guide you. Don't ever let a sense of giving up or a sense of avoidance hold you back from moving forward to the kind of relationships and work where you belong, All right, number 8, detach from the belief that you passively, just magically attract bad people. I hear people say this all the time. I attract narcissists. Well, acknowledge that the issue is not really who is attracted to you. The issue is who you get attracted to, who you tolerate, who you date, who you sleep with. That is the problem. And that's a much better problem to have than some sort of magic pheromone attraction to sick people. And it's true, like people who want to exploit others, they might look for people who are weak, people who have no boundaries, people who are not defending themselves. So no, don't be that person. Don't be that person who can tolerate it. I think that bad people are seeking out people to exploit a little less than sometimes they're given credit for. I think they're just knocking around looking for people who will tolerate them. And that's kind of, that's not really any different than anybody else. So it's your tolerance, it's your boundaries, it's your red light detector that have to switch on. If you're going to double down on your healing, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to take responsibility that you are the gatekeeper. And you may have heard me say, I attract mosquitoes, but I don't marry them. What I attract has nothing to do with what I attach to, okay? All right, number 9, if you have addictive behaviors, make recovery your first priority. Alcohol, drugs, food, pornography, spending, all that stuff. Your healing will get an enormous boost when you allow yourself to experience life's ups and downs and show up for it and not escape it. Now, I have CPTSD too. I know how tempting it is to try to grab on and control things or run away from them or just get into some kind of oblivion. And it's almost universal with people with CPTSD. It's going to take one form or another. And just because it's not heroin doesn't mean it's not terrible. So I'm not going to get into all the means that people have to recover from these specific addictions. But what I want to say to you right now is if you have an addictive tendency, just move that to number 1 spot on your list of how you're going to double down on your healing. If you're escaping, if you're using anything at all to sort of escape life's ups and downs and those feelings of disappointment and stress and emptiness and loneliness, I totally know what it's like. But if you're using something to escape that, you cannot recover from it. It's almost impossible. And I mean, look around you at people who have these kind of struggles. Look around at people who once had the struggles and got better. The path towards healing always involves facing what's going wrong. And your life, even when you're perfectly healed, which nobody's going to be perfectly healed, but even if you were, life is going to have ups and downs. You're going to lose friends, big disappointments will happen, outside events will happen. You're going to need a means to be able to handle what comes. And that is true freedom when you feel like whatever happens, I'll be able to face it. You can't just beat yourself up. You can't just read a book. There are a lot of ways that you can heal, but one of them is going to have to be a way that you self-comfort and bring yourself back out of dysregulation and into re-regulation. And when you have that, you'll find it a lot easier to overcome addictions. All right, number 10, sit down and ask yourself. It's just a thought exercise. I really like this one. Ask yourself, if I really had to solve this problem, what are 10 things I could do? And I love doing this. I apply it to all kinds of problems, but it's a really good one to do about how you would heal from your complex PTSD. Because you actually have the answers in there. You know a number of things that you suspect would be really helpful, but you just haven't had the energy or the focus to take them on right now. So make a list of them. You don't have to take them on all at once, right? But make a list of them. Just like bring them into the sunlight. Let them in. Just let them into your mind and heart and see what happens. Well, in this video, I want to talk about another thing that can happen when we talk a lot about the past, and that's that it risks becoming our identity. Now, I know that you are technically not your trauma, but you know the feeling where you've just told a long story about some part of your past, and then it feels like there should be some resolution feeling or punchline or just relief, and all you feel is not good. Well, for me, that's how therapy appointments pretty much always felt. I'd have to wait 10 or 15 minutes before I could start driving home because I would be sitting in my car crying and I couldn't feel my hands, and I definitely wouldn't have been able to pay attention to the cars around me. And I know now that's the feeling of being dysregulated. And if you could have done a brain scan on me while I was sitting in that car, you might have seen that my brain waves, rather than flowing together in parallel curvy lines, were going all over the place. And my left front cortex, because I was talking about traumatic things, was probably inhibited, which means I wasn't able to think very well. And over here on the right side, my emotions were just super activated, so I was something like an emotional zombie. And, the more time you spend like that, the more you a little bit get stuck like that. And you don't want to get stuck like that. We can become people who talk a lot about what happened and become very identified with it. It can become almost more real to us than what's happening in present time. And present time is where all the possibility is now. It's the part that we can actually influence and where we can make choices, like choosing to eliminate some destructive habits or eliminate people from our lives who are not healthy for us. This is where, present time, we can really make change happen. So this is why I suggest to people that they mix it up a little. It's not terrible to talk about the bad things or think about them some, but you might want to limit it to just safe and appropriate listeners and to a finite number of minutes. So if you're with a good friend and you're reminded of a traumatic memory, maybe talk about it for 5 minutes and then make yourself change the subject. You can also decide to just mention it, but not go into all the details, or not mention it at all. You can do that with your thinking too. You can let yourself think about stuff you worry about for 10 minutes and then set a timer and stop thinking about it. Make yourself do it. If you find yourself getting stuck in bad memories and hopeless feelings about your life because of what you've gone through, here's something you can try. And it's good to do in writing. You make 2 columns on a piece of paper. And on the left-hand side, you write about something bad about your past. Like for me, my mom was an alcoholic. And then in the right-hand column, you put something from about the same time in your life that actually strengthened you. My stepdad was not an alcoholic, and he took care of us pretty well. Now, on the bad side, our family was poor, and there was a lot of arguing about money. But on the other side,
I started several businesses in my early teens, and this prepared me to be an entrepreneur as an adult, which is what I'm doing right now, and it's been really wonderful. On the left side, you could say I was neglected as a child, and on the right, there were 2 or 3 parents of friends who really reached out and supported me and kept an eye on me. And so when you ask me about the story of my life, if I'm identified with the trauma, I might say, well, my mother was an alcoholic, we had terrible financial problems, and there was a lot of fighting about it, and I was neglected. But when I'm identified with the positive things, my story could also just as accurately be told as, I had a stepfather who I could count on, and he took good care of us. And I learned entrepreneurship from some businesses I started as a kid, and this has provided a living for me all my life. And it helped that there were several adults in our neighborhood who supported me and kept an eye on me. Now, this sounds like a completely different life, right? But it's the same life. It's just another perspective on it. I don't have to lie about the bad things that happened or try to pretend they never happened. I can keep that as a memory, as a fact. But I don't have to focus on just the bad things, and I don't have to make them my identity. I choose to include the good things in my identity. And the more I get free from the trauma identity, the more good experiences I have to tip the scales toward a positive sense of myself and gratitude for the full experience of my life. So you can try this. You'll be amazed how much you can lift your mood in the moment by just naming the good things within yourself, within the people you've known, and in your experiences. Everybody knows that crappy experiences in our childhood can end up causing a whole slew of symptoms in our adult life. Stuff like depression, anxiety, relationship problems, health problems, difficulties with learning and paying attention and memory. One name for these symptoms is childhood PTSD. And if you think you have it, you've probably tried all kinds of treatments, from therapy and books and counseling and support groups and even medication. But if you're like most people I talk to, these normal people solutions are only kind of effective. They work for a while, so long as you're going to the class or until the insurance runs out. But after that, you're kind of on your own, worried, scared. You're going to slip back into all the symptoms of PTSD. That's what used to happen to me. I was trying to get my life together, and I was willing to follow all that good, smart advice from the people in my life. But it wasn't helping me. I would go to therapy 3 times a week, and when I came out, I would feel worse than when the hour started. I was worried about how I was going to get even the 2 or 3 days to the next appointment. But now I know that those solutions have this one big piece missing for people with childhood PTSD. There are things that you can do right now that totally work, but you have to understand what the real underlying problem is. Until recently, the effects on us as adults were thought to be almost entirely psychological. They thought we had developed negative self-esteem, negative beliefs about ourselves, maybe thought that we deserved to be in bad relationships, that kind of thing. Now, this may be partially true in some people, but it's not the whole story, not at all. So sure, childhood trauma can cause psychological problems, but the really important thing for us is that it can cause brain changes. So the effects are not just psychological, but neurological. And neurological problems can manifest in every part of our lives. It can result in physical health problems like diabetes and heart disease. But it can also manifest as emotional problems like depression or uncontrollable anger. Or it can manifest in behaviors that in theory we can control. Stuff like drug and alcohol abuse, risky sex, getting into abusive relationships, or the opposite, avoiding everyone. So these things start as neurological changes and then become psychological issues that then become self-destructive behaviors. So you can talk to a therapist about the behaviors or about the psychological issues, but if your brain is just sending compromised signals to other parts of your brain or to your organs, you have a problem that's really hard to talk your way out of. And that's not really how we were trained to think about it, right? You're supposed to talk about your problems, but when you have PTSD, talking about it can sometimes make it worse than if you weren't to talk about it. So if you're relating to this so far, then you're probably all too familiar with that feeling that you're kind of going down this path in life and you're getting really freaked out and you don't know how you got there and you don't know how you can dig your way out. So here's the missing piece. The underlying problem in childhood PTSD is dysregulation. First, we get dysregulated in the brain. Now, you probably know the feeling really well. Maybe your emotions go up through the roof and then they go really flat and you say things you don't mean, or you get very spaced out and you do things like getting lost driving through your own neighborhood, or you walk into a room and you don't know why you came in there, or you lose your train of thought in the middle of trying to speak a sentence, or you get clumsy and you trip and you drop things. These are the telltale signs that your normally well-regulated brain has gone dysregulated. It's a little bit out of whack. If they did an MRI on you, they might see whole sections that have gone dark. There's no activity there. Or they'd see areas that are unusually lit up and not communicating well with the other parts of the brain that they're supposed to communicate smoothly with. After a while, our brains will gradually come back to a regulated state, but when you're suffering with childhood PTSD, you're spending way too much time in that dysregulated state, and it's really limiting. Dysregulated people can't think straight. They can't make good decisions. Their judgment is wrong. Research has shown that people who had a really rough childhood can sometimes have a lot of difficulty being aware when danger is at hand or a loss is about to happen, and they can't adjust their behavior accordingly. Do you ever feel like you just keep walking into the same problem over and over again and you didn't see it coming? It's really easy to spot in other people, but when you have childhood PTSD, it's sort of like you wake up and you go, how did I get here again? Now, psychological problems respond to talking and reason, but neurological problems have to be addressed a little differently. When I learned how to re-regulate my brain whenever I needed to, then I could start to rehabilitate every part of my life that had been damaged before. I started to feel the best parts of myself coming back online: my intelligence, my compassion, my ability to connect with people and to form lovely, nourishing, safe relationships. I could follow through on plans I made. I could be responsible. I could be healthy. I could be safe. I could be happy. If dysregulation is the underlying problem, then a purely psychological approach is only going to be able to get us a little temporary relief, which is not entirely a bad thing, but it's not going to get us a permanent change out of the suckiness of having PTSD. For lasting change, we need to get our brains working again, to re-regulate them. And with that done, then we can begin to re-regulate our emotions, taking them back from extremes of numbness and hyperintensity back to center. And from there, we can begin to re-regulate our decisions and our behaviors and take them back from the extremes that we're prone to with childhood PTSD of too much and too little.
The first thing, and this one's been made harder for a lot of us lately, but it's time to stop isolating. That is a form of self-sabotage. If you're like most people with CPTSD, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you get extra triggered by other people, and it can be hard to show up with an open heart and an open mind in social situations and to make the kind of connection with other people that supports healing. There's this huge temptation to pull back from other people. And you might be isolating overtly, hiding out in your house, or you might be isolating covertly and kind of acting like you're available and friendly, but secretly avoiding invitations and personal openness and making commitments to people. And either way, the result is the same. You end up alone. And as much as you may find it hard, you need other people to be in the mix, to be reflecting back to you and interacting with you so that you can progress in your own healing. Now, isolation is funny. It's caused by trauma, but it causes trauma. And I know a bunch of you are going to say isolating is the only way that you stay safe from the kind of mistreatment that you went through in the past. And in one way, you're right. If you don't have contact with people, well, yeah, they can't mistreat you. But at the same time, if you don't have contact with people, you can't heal. So there comes a time, if you're going to stop sabotaging yourself, that you've got to stop causing trauma for yourself and let people in a little bit. What I suggest to you is that you titrate. That's a word that I borrowed from the medical world that means just like do a little bit at a time. You let people in a little bit, you do something, and then you rest and you see how did that go. Then you do a little bit more with people, and then you step back and you go, how did that go? And then you do a little more back, more back. You can make this easier and help yourself get stronger and more flexible around people if you can, at the same time, learn to calm those triggers. And if you want a way to do that, you can go take my free course, The Daily Practice. I always put a link to it below my videos down in the description section. So that's there for you. That teaches 2 simple techniques you can use every day to have less fear, less anger, and to become just more free to connect with people and to have fun and be yourself. Okay, the second thing you're doing that's sabotaging your healing is staying stuck in your sad stories. And I know you were told that telling these stories and exploring them and feeling your feelings about them, if you could just do it enough times or for enough years, that someday you'd feel better. And if that worked for you, or you're just watching this video because you want to help a friend, then great. But if you feel that maybe you've told your story and felt the feelings and learned whatever you can about what happened in the past, maybe it's time for a present time approach to healing that brings your attention to right now and what you can do to calm your CPTSD symptoms, like dysregulation and intense emotions, and what you can do to start making big positive changes in your life. Because I know you want that. It's a happy story that you want to live in now, right? This bad stuff, it did happen to you and people hurt you, and for a long time it suppressed you and held you back. But now, let your story be about you, not the people who hurt you, not about the past, about you now. There is definitely a time and place to talk about what happened, and it can be very healing when it's the right time and in the right measure. But I haven't found that talking and talking and talking and talking about it delivered continuing returns. It helps at first maybe, but then it stops. And yes, you need to have your story acknowledged and you need to share it. But you also need to feel better today. It can't be like this long-term someday thing. Like today, we need to feel better. And we need to be creating a life we like right now. We want to connect with other people, to love them and be loved by them. And the thing is, when the sad stories are dominating our lives, we can't really do that. We're not present. We can't really pay attention to the lovely person right in front of us. And we don't tend to have good boundaries. And to be honest, when we're telling these stories, we're kind of negative to be around. So I'm not telling you to deny what happened, but if you've talked it to death and you still feel like your healing is stuck, maybe all that talking has turned into self-sabotage. And it's time to focus on you now and ways that you can start making things better in your work, in your relationships, in your sense of meaning, because those are all important. Okay, the third thing you can stop doing if you want to get out of self-sabotage is to stop the angry outbursts of negative emotions. Now, I know you have things to feel angry about, and what happened to you can't be erased, but there's an anger that's common with CPTSD that can get monster-sized when you're overwhelmed or feeling threatened. And no matter how perfectly you can trace why you feel that way, raging is going to cause problems in your life. It turns out that whole idea about like pounding pillows and venting when you're angry, was that ever suggested to you? Yeah, well, some researchers at Iowa State University showed that, well, what all of us already suspected, not only doesn't it reduce anger, it makes it worse. People get more aggressive from doing this. Nothing will destroy your relationships and your career and your mental health faster than lashing out from that traumatized place inside. And if you were traumatized as a kid, I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you've done it. It's almost certainly been done to you, and it's poison. So yes, there are reasons to be angry. There are present-day things that might make you legitimately very upset when you're insulted or cheated or whatnot. And there are past things that happened that weren't fair and that made you feel damaged or robbed you of a wholeness that you worry you're never going to be able to find again. And I don't blame you for having anger, but here's the thing. What happened to you can never be totally set right because it's in the past and you can't change the past. And so your healing can't depend on that. It depends ultimately on you facing reality, doing what you can about what happened, if anything, and then with every bit of energy you have left, to forge a good and happy life. Your happiness doesn't depend on getting revenge or getting an apology. You probably will never have those things, but you can become happy by not damaging your life anymore. You can be happy by blossoming into your real self, being you, using your talents and developing your gifts so that you can work and give love and serve the world in the unique way that only you can. We can do these things in 1,000 ways, but what we need is to feel useful. And from there, the anger has a way of just kind of working itself out. It comes out of your heart, it comes out of your mind, it comes out of your cells so that you can be free. Okay, the fourth thing to stop doing is to stop being in bad relationships. And I know we are way inside that sort of easier said than done territory, but I'm going to tell you straight, if you're going to heal, you've got to stop being in these abusive, chaotic, disrespectful, non-mutual, or breadcrumb relationships. And to keep seeking them out, it's insane. And to stay in them is spiritual death. Now, when you know something is killing you or harming the other person, but you stay anyway, there is an injury you're doing to your own integrity and self-respect that is going to then sabotage anything else that you're trying to change. Now, are there ever reasons to stay? Of course. Children come to mind. If you have a partner who's ill and for the time being you need to stay, I'm not going to try to list all the reasons why you wouldn't leave. I'm just suggesting that you look at the fact, and I know you know this, that when you believe that you have no choice but to stay in a bad or exploitive or damaging relationship, it's probably your past trauma talking. And for you to heal, some stronger part of you needs to rise up and see the situation for what it is and get you out of there. Okay, so the fifth thing that you want to get free of is a tendency to run away from challenges and opportunities. Have you done this? How many times have you turned away from a potentially good thing, a job, a relationship, telling somebody how you really feel about them, that you love them, because you had to fear that your CPTSD symptoms would just come up and drown you if you messed anything up or if you got rejected? Putting yourself out there and living your life always, always involves risk, the risk of failure. And the horrible thing about living with dysregulation and CPTSD is that failure is a risk we feel we can't afford to take. And I'm not going to give you some rah-rah personal development pep talk that you just have to be tough or think positively or something. You are tough. But what's needed to cope with failure and to not just like sacrifice everything just to avoid failure is a way to offload all that negative emotion that comes up around it. You don't have to like have no emotion, but you need to offload just enough that you're actually okay. And when your CPTSD is totally untreated and you're dysregulated and your life is shaky, no, you can't afford to lose anything, so you don't try. But when you're active in the process of healing, when you're supported by a friend or two or three who know what your challenges are, who know why it's so worth it for you to keep taking your next brave steps, when you know how to calm your triggers, you can afford to take the risk. Now, the only way to grow and learn is to try things. And the only way to bear the possibility that most of what you try is not going to pan out, it's just to embrace yourself as someone who tries and to have a really good way to find ease inside when it's hard and when you fail. It's okay if it's hard out there when there's ease in here. And that's what you didn't used to have. But now you can have that. You have freedom to try because there's ease. And if you haven't found a way to give that ease to yourself, I can teach you. It's in that link. I just keep pointing to the daily practice thing below. It's free. It's a course. You can learn it and try it in less than an hour. And it can help you to release all that pent-up anger and fear and just help you experience a little bit of rest, just to experience being yourself in peace, okay? The victory for you that you're reaching for, it's more than just feeling better. And you do need to feel better, and I want that for you. But the victory is that you become your real self, not held back, but free to grow into all that you're capable of becoming. Childhood PTSD is, in its essence, an injury to our ability to connect with other people. Abuse and neglect early in our lives literally change our brains.
And neglect in particular can physically restrict the normal processes that enable us to identify good, appropriate people to bring into our lives and to gradually open ourselves up to them and develop close and trusting relationships. This, to me, is the most tragic part of childhood PTSD. To be capable of love, but not to be able to sustain a normal, loving relationship is a devastating price to pay for what happened. But the great news is we can totally make progress in this area if we are intentional about it. If we just kind of leave it to chance and hope we'll figure out love later in our lives, or maybe when the right person comes along, we're not likely to improve. And in fact, if you look around, the people you know, you'll see a lot of older people who have actually deteriorated from being able to be close to others. If we don't work on this, we risk getting more and more cranky and isolated and hard on other people. And that's the tragedy. To me, the goal of life is to really learn to love other people. And it turns out that having and growing our connections with others is one of the most powerful ways we can heal our own PTSD. There's a large body of research emerging that shows that loving relationships actually help us heal our telomeres, the little caps on the strands of DNA that protect us from disease and slow down our aging. Love and connection are important for everyone, and especially for us who have so much catching up to do. Now, most people with PTSD have been hurt in this ability to connect, and if that's you too, then you're likely to struggle with relationships in proportion to the amount of time you spend in dysregulation. Dysregulation breaks connections. Re-regulation puts us in a place where we can begin to repair connections. As people whose ability to connect may be a bit wonky, we can definitely take steps to gradually heal this, and it doesn't always come naturally. Sometimes we have to be very intentional about it and work on it and take steps that are the opposite of the first impulse that comes to mind when we find ourselves struggling. Now, loneliness and feeling disconnection are universal experiences for everyone, at least a little bit, but for us, it can take over our lives. And this has everything to do with dysregulation, which makes connection very difficult, and re-regulation, which makes change in this part of ourselves possible. So we want to strike a balance, a healthy balance between solitude, which is the ability to tolerate and even enjoy our alone time, and connection with others. Because people with childhood PTSD tend to do a lot of things in extreme ways, and this is one of them. We isolate or live in deathly fear that people will leave us. We cling or we run away, and we might go one way with friends and the other way with significant others, but these extremes rob us of much of the good we're meant to have through our relationships with the people in our lives. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and I may make a whole course on it later this year, but for right now, here are some important things to remember in order, at the very least, to grow more regulated. So first, don't let yourself get too lonely. Every problem of your character will grow worse when you're in isolation. People who have cut everyone out of their lives seldom realize how weird they've become. Their rationale for avoiding everyone sounds plausible to them, but to the rest of us, it's just sad. It is a wish virtually everyone has when they know they're reaching the end of their lives. They'll say they wish they had given even more of their time and attention to loving relationships. So how can we grow closer to love in a realistic and gradual way that can be sustained? So not letting ourselves get too lonely is how we can grow closer to love in a realistic and gradual way that can be sustained. Loneliness taken to the extreme, and by that I mean we've convinced ourselves that we like the loneliness and we found ways to numb out the nagging worry and sadness about it. This kind of loneliness and pretending corrupts us in the end. And when we're lonely in life, it should feel lonely. The feeling of loneliness is a gift that nudges us to reach out and connect, to keep on trying, to keep getting out of the house when it's tempting to hide out there. So another suggestion is to make yourself connect with people face to face every day. Get out of the house, leave your normal space, and find a way to walk down the street and interact with the world. Also, become a great listener. When you're with someone, you actually don't have to talk about yourself half the time or even at all. If you can learn to give your full attention to the person who's with you and to really listen to them without jumping in with your own story or debating the legitimacy of what they're saying or any digressions at all, the connection between the two of you will get stronger. I mean, right in that moment, you will begin to feel closer. And real closeness will soften any impulses you have to cling to the other person or escape from them or try to control who they are. Now, some people go to the opposite extreme and they pour their whole identity into another person as if this is an extension of themselves. Now, not living in the center of your being carries huge risks because your own strengths are not being revealed and your own problems are not being exposed, which would cause you and your circumstances to evolve. Some people cling to relationships or they get obsessed or promiscuous. And this is every bit as deadening for their souls as having no one. In fact, it's probably worse. Nothing can derail your life so dramatically as sexual relationships with people who don't care about you. For women in particular, sex bonds us to others, whether we love them or even like them. I know there are exceptions to this rule, but I would not really hold up sex with no strings as anything you would want to try in order to become happier or better regulated. Romantic and sexual drama can dysregulate you as surely as violence can. Other people may be able to have casual sex, but for those struggling to regulate, I don't recommend it. Trusting intimate relationships take time. So if you're hooking up with people or getting together with them in a rush or impulsively in the name of having fun, or just to fill your weekend nights until the right person comes along, you're in for a world of struggle. This topic is going to be my next course, and I have a lot to say about losing one's way along the path to love and finding it again. But some quick tips for now, while you're really working on your childhood PTSD, include: notice the relationship between dysregulation and relationship status. Are you more or less regulated when you're with someone? Generally speaking, a conflict-filled relationship will create more dysregulation than being alone, and a harmonious relationship will lead to less dysregulation. An unstable relationship where you're in fear about getting left all the time will lead to more dysregulation, and a secure relationship will lead to less dysregulation. So harmonious, secure relationships are a positive path forward and something to strive for. And the trick of that is, being in a high-drama, abusive, or unstable relationship does not work to bide our time until the right person comes. These negative relationships actually take us way off that path. The right person will never find us. Or if they do, our manner, our energy, the way we engage with others will be ragged from the days or years of difficulty we've had. So sometimes the shortest path to true love is found by being single for a while. So if you're single or whatever is going on in your love life and you experience a lot of loneliness, a very good and re-regulating thing you can do is to participate. Participate in your neighborhood, in your work life, in 12-step groups, in family get-togethers where you can be supportive of others. Practice love by being loving to others in little ways. If you're having trouble getting that started, here's a first step. Each day, find 2 people you can talk to in the line at the store or out on the sidewalk or on the phone, and contact them just to express something positive and supportive for them. Don't talk about yourself in this conversation. Just show up for the other person. I guarantee you, if you do this twice a day, things will shift and you'll grow in your capacity to love, which can't help but lead to more connection. And in time, you'll find that that love is shining right back at you.
I want to show you the big picture, what I've noticed from my own life and from teaching and coaching thousands of people who suffer with PTSD symptoms from childhood. And what I've noticed is that healing tends to flow through 5 crucial phases. Okay? So the first phase of healing is to realize what trauma is actually doing to you. Obviously, everybody's different, but the effects of abuse and neglect in childhood tend to follow very common patterns. They're so common that I think you'll find it comforting to find out that no, a lot of your challenges and mistakes are not, as you may have thought, some kind of personal failure. When you learn the common effects of trauma, this is something I teach in all my courses, you're going to find out how many of your problems are normal. you can totally let go of all the blame on yourself. You don't have some kind of crazy preference for drama. You're not seeking out people who hurt you. You're not trying to recreate your childhood. Have you ever been told these things? The common symptoms of CPTSD from childhood are normal responses to abnormal circumstances during your developmental years. Yes, there are psychological elements. Yes, we sometimes sabotage ourselves, but at its root, CPTSD is a neurological injury that disrupts brain and body systems, and this affects your health. It can cause chronic disease, it can cause learning problems, relationship problems, financial problems, depression, anxiety, addiction, and this is a big one that gets overlooked. It can make it impossible to make clear-headed decisions right when you need to make a clear-headed decision. There's a lot of wrong information out there. You see it on TV and movies a lot. A traumatized person finally just talks about it and everything magically gets better. If only it were that easy, right? Of course, it looks from the outside like we just aren't seeing that we're traumatized. We're not admitting what's actually at the root of our problems. It looks like that because our actions don't make sense. We probably seem deluded, and it makes no sense that we would keep making the same self-sabotaging mistake over and over. So to someone who doesn't have CPTSD, it's easy to assume this is some kind of decision we're making or a choice. And if someone believes that, they can dress it up with all kinds of reasoning about why that would be. But the telltale sign that an idea or an assessment isn't really the right one in your case is that applying it doesn't do anything for you. Results matter. There might be a tiny puff of belief when you first hear an explanation for your symptoms. Oh, you just want things to be bad. But if you give it a few days and it still doesn't work, well, there it is. Knowing some idea of what's wrong with you is not a solution. If it doesn't lead to you healing, it might work for other people, but if it doesn't work for you, it's an idea, not a solution. And if your failure to respond to common treatments is making you feel ashamed, like there's something wrong with you, then internalizing this, it's just a misunderstanding. It's wrong information. This should come as a relief. We now have a much better understanding of what trauma actually does to people. You're not a bad person. You're normal. Your symptoms are not your fault. Knowing this is the first crucial phase of healing. The second phase of healing is to understand the root cause of your symptoms. For most people, this is dysregulation. Chronic stress and trauma in childhood can cause brain and nervous system changes that affect every system of the body. Those normally regulated systems become dysregulated. And you'll hear me use that word all the time, dysregulated. There's emotional dysregulation and there's neurological dysregulation, including dysregulation of brain activity from like a flowing pattern to a chaotic pattern. And this in turn leads to dysregulation of hormones and chemical signals that govern your immune system, your heart function, your reproductive system, your metabolism, your attention span, your ability to stay calm and present and not melt down emotionally, or your tendency to totally space out at crucial moments. And in this stage of healing, you learn to notice when dysregulation is happening. What are the signs that you have it? What triggers seem to set it off? This sets off a huge wave of growth for the people that I work with, just like it did for me. They'll often say, oh my God, that's what I have. No one's ever described this before. And it's the dysregulation that throws me off every time. Now, if you have that, that's what's made it almost impossible to stop making those same mistakes. It's made it impossible to solve problems in your life that seem to just hang around or get worse, even though you do everything right. It's the dysregulation, and guess what? You can learn to re-regulate. You can learn to do that. It's strange at first, and it'll surprise the heck out of you to find that simple techniques can stop a trigger from turning into an upset and then a full day or 3 days of dysregulation. You might still get dysregulated sometimes, but you'll notice it sooner, and you'll be able to turn it around quickly and get back to being okay and doing what you're doing, focusing, being calm. When you're regulated, you're a lot less likely to lose your temper or have an anxiety attack or feel overwhelmed or overeat. You have a way out of all that. And when you're free, so many things in life become possible. I love teaching people about this in my coaching programs because it's one thing to read about how to re-regulate or watch a video about it, but being in a small group, connecting every week with people who know you and sharing what you're trying, what you're noticing, having people hear you and be happy for you, and sharing their discoveries about what works. You know, I get to see this light go on in everyone's eyes, like, oh, that's it. We're not failures. We're not stupid. We're dysregulated. And this can be healed. And we watch each other do it. You can see this transformation in people. And so that is the third crucial phase of healing, learning to connect with other people. This is probably the single harshest impact of childhood trauma on your adult life. Feeling like an outsider, feeling like you didn't get the memo on how to act, or you're good at acting like you're fine, but you never feel like you're safe to be yourself. You feel lonely, even in a crowd. And of course, romantic relationships can be dreadful for us. We can get obsessive. We could end up having no relationships. It's not supposed to be this way. And I say it again and again, childhood PTSD is an injury to our ability to connect with other people. It's an injury, but this capacity to connect can be learned. When you're more regulated, it's easier to connect, and it works the other way. More connection, handled slowly and consciously, can help you get more regulated. So healing is kind of an upward spiral. It's not a straight line. And sometimes it goes fast and then slow and fast and slow, but you can keep progressing if you stick with it. The fourth crucial phase of healing is all about facing your own self-defeating behaviors. Do you ruin relationships with anger? Are you isolating? Do you have addictions or a problem with food and weight that's hurting your health? Do you feel stuck in an abusive relationship? These are all trauma related, and a lot of traumatized people stay stuck with these problems all their lives. When you're re-regulated and connected a little more, you can begin to change these. That is sacred and honorable work, to keep facing your own mistakes. Don't be shy of it. It feels good, making day-to-day changes in a positive direction. This is where life starts to get much more open, much more happy, and then comes the fifth crucial phase of healing, and that's when you're able to shed your old, limited idea of yourself, stuck in resentment or hopelessness or paralysis or trying to please people who are never going to be pleased with anything you do anyway. This is the phase where you're able to discover who you really are, the real you, and the gifts that you were meant to bring into the world. This is the phase of joy and sharing and healing with others. As I hear from all the people in the channel, in my online community who engage with my content about patterns that are helpful and patterns that really just make people who want to heal feel miserable. Okay, so I notice two basic self-concepts out there. The first is what I notice in people who are working hard to figure out the problem caused by their experiences and to find the solutions that seem to help them get better. Now, not everything they've tried may have been helpful, but they're active in this project and noticing where they get lifted up and where they fall short. And when they comment, they'll tell you these little nuggets of wisdom. They'll say, you know, I tried X, I did Y, I did Z, and X was horrible. Y was okay, but Z was amazing, and that's what really helped me. And there are clear signs that someone is healing too, that they get along better with people, they feel more at ease in groups or when they're alone, and their talents and gifts start emerging and filling up their lives with purpose and hopefulness and a helpfulness for other people as well. And they'll begin to tell you that. So for this first group, they're subscribing to my channel because, and this is what they tell me, it's practical, it's solution oriented, and it's based on not just theory, but real experience that they can relate to. They feel seen, they feel not alone anymore. I love that. I feel that way too. And for people who are having a breakthrough in their healing like this, it is so exciting to try out new tools, new ideas, and see if there's something in there that they can use. They want inspiration. They want to hear how other people heal. They want action steps. They're ready to go. Now, you can tell I'm very fond of this group, right? I also love the second group, but these are the folks where the breakthrough hasn't happened yet. They're good people. They've worked really hard on their healing, and a lot of them are knowledgeable about the treatments out there, and they've tried a lot of them, but the healing hasn't come yet. And so this group is really, really discouraged, and they come to feel helpless and hopeless, and you can see it in the comments they write. Now, deep down inside, they've stopped believing that healing is possible for them. And all that leaves them, and you see it in their comments, is bitterness. So people who are going through this will have a lot to say about things outside of themselves, family members, exes, society, the people who said they would help them but couldn't or wouldn't, anybody who made them feel unimportant and unseen and unloved. And that's all real, and I know it hurt them. People in this state of discouragement can tell you very clearly what's wrong with all this, what ought to change, and what their pain is like. They're very, very in touch with their pain. And most of us have been there. That's part of it, right? For all of us. But this second group, this discouraged and stuck group, what's also clear is that they have a very vague or non-existent concept of themselves, of what they would be like without that emotional pain. The pain becomes everything, as if it's who they are. And so they can't see themselves in a different future state where things have changed for the better. They can't even imagine it, what they might be like, what day-to-day life would feel like if they weren't trapped inside their own symptoms. So that's what I mean by stuck. Now, getting stuck in pain and isolation is a very traumatized thing to do. It happens to everybody sometimes. But if you want to break out of that, you have to do what I call breaking the wheel. And what I mean by the wheel is the churning, negative thinking and emotion states that go round and round with us. The blame, the obsession with people who hurt you, the struggles, the failures, the ways that you were never accepted or seen, and the stories that you told yourself over and over about why you are the way you are. And it's not that these stories are not true necessarily, but if we can't stop the spinning, the wheel just gets stronger and faster. And it's like a centrifuge, right? Something spinning that throws off and scatters everything that comes near it. It throws off people who love us. It throws off wonderful opportunities. It throws off financial security and joy, right? All gone. And the wheel is very seductive at the same time, and that's why I use this metaphor. You can't just slow the wheel down. You don't ask it a lot of questions or analyze the trajectory of everything that's flying around the room. You just have to take a big metaphorical stick and shove it in there and break that wheel. And don't worry, the wheel's made of air, and when you break it, the whole thing evaporates. It's not going to hit you in the face with fragments or anything. It just evaporates. It's gone. It's like waking up from a bad dream. You thought the wheel got the better of you, but it didn't. And you thought it protected you, but it actually just kept you stuck in pain and made you see nothing but helplessness. But you know what? You're not helpless. There's a whole wide world of experiences out there if you can get a little breathing room just to get started from that cycle of fear and anger and analysis and diagnosis and blame and then fear again. Thinking and talking about this stuff doesn't make it go away. It goes away, and remember, all you need is just a little bit of breathing room. It goes away when just for a moment you can just release the story. Open yourself up to a fresh and new experience of yourself and your capabilities in present time. The focus needs to come off of time past and other people and onto the only thing you can heal, which is yourself. And the knowledge that right here, right now, through practical steps, you open the door to that healing process by changing your mental state. Not helpless, hopeful. And for there to be hope, you need to have a vision, an ideal. You need to have a belief that healing is possible inside your own healing, whether or not other people change, whether or not circumstances change. This is the crucial sign that someone is on a good path. They recognize their own agency. Do you know that term? They begin to see choices that they can make, even when CPTSD puts nothing but hard choices in front of them. You always have a choice, and despite the symptoms you have today, you can move one foot in front of the other toward the healed life that you deserve. Now, you can choose to learn a new way to respond to the inevitable stressors and hardships of life. They will never stop. Life's going to keep throwing this stuff at you, but you can change. It starts in here. It starts in the way that you regard the possibility of your own healing. Can you see it? Do you believe it's possible that things could be better and easier in the future than they are right now? And are you willing to make some changes, starting with the way you talk to yourself about your trauma? Because if you're telling yourself that you're hopelessly screwed up, then whether you mean to or not, you're disconnecting with your life and all the people in it. People generally have a lot of compassion, but when they sense that negative wheel is spinning, it's like a hum. You can feel it in other people, right? And it makes you want to pull away. So it ends up isolating you when you go there. The very thing you're longing for isn't happening for you when that wheel is spinning. And you're like, why can I not get some support? Why doesn't anyone believe in me? Can't they see that I need some help? And that is a really hard place to be. And worst of all, that spinning wheel of negative ideas about yourself blinds you to who you really are, to all the good things that you're capable of bringing to this world. Your life is real. Your life is important. So how do you even begin? And this is one of the reasons childhood PTSD is so hard, is because it can make even little steps just seem overwhelming. And God forbid, there's a whole list of things that you need to do and you know it. It can be paralyzing. But if today you can just do one thing, I'll keep it really simple for you. Just get it into your mind, what it will feel like when your PTSD reactions to life are reduced. You want to give it a try? Let's take a minute and I'll walk you through it. Imagine you're in a stressful situation. You're making a mistake at work, or visiting your family, or getting your feelings hurt by a friend who lets you down. Pick something that's both hard for you, but also that's likely to happen at some point in your future. It's realistic. Now, remember what it's like when your CPTSD triggers start firing up and that wheel starts to spin. Here it goes. And you start getting dysregulated and you start reacting in the old ways you hate. You feel tight, your heart races, you want to lash out, maybe you start getting numb, and you get scared that that same old part of you that always comes out when you're triggered is going to happen one more time, okay? Now, let that go. Now, imagine you're in that situation, the bad thing happens, but now your PTSD symptoms are 50% less. You feel a little rise when you're triggered, but it doesn't go over the top. You don't lose control. You still have choices about the words you say, your facial expression, the harsh thoughts that are going through your head. You can see them, but you can decide not to say anything in the moment. Would a 50% reduction in symptoms change how that all turned out? Okay, probably, right? Same situation, but this time let's take the symptoms down a little more to say 20% of what you're used to. What would that be like? The bad thing happens, you feel it, it hurts, but it doesn't carry you away. Would you be able to express yourself better? Would you be able to stay present and keep your choices? Could the relationship that in the past would have blown up in your face instead survive without damage, even though something hurt your feelings? Would it make a difference in your life if you could do that long term whenever stressful situations come up, right? Would strength in this area allow you to change some of your circumstances? Would it be easier then to make friends with people who fit you a little better than the ones you have right now in your life? And if that were all going well, could you imagine other things going well? Your relationship with a partner, your career, your physical health, your ability to share your gifts with the world. Well, now you just joined the ranks of the first group I mentioned. That's how you do it. The ones who can see, imagine a better future, and the ones who are more likely than anybody else to actually make it there. It starts by allowing yourself to believe that you're capable of changing your life.
Here are 3 reasons why I believe healing your own symptoms of childhood PTSD is so important, it might even be more important than diagnosis. First of all, here in the US anyway, there is still no official diagnosis, technically, of complex PTSD or CPTSD. That's the kind that comes from ongoing intense stress rather than a specific or short-term experience of intense stress like with PTSD. For example, PTSD could be from a battle. CPTSD could be from spending years living in a war zone. The symptoms are similar, but they're not the same, and neither are the treatments. But for whatever reason, the US doesn't yet recognize CPTSD as a distinct diagnosis. Does that mean you don't have it? Who knows? What we do know is that people who grew up with abuse and neglect show a common and distinct set of symptoms. And if you want to learn more about those, I summarize them in a 20-question quiz that you can take. I put a link to that down in the description section below. And from time to time, I get a note from someone who has taken the quiz who wants to know how to interpret the results. And of course, I'm not a doctor or therapist, and I can't diagnose anyone. But anyone can look at that list of symptoms and reflect on whether this sounds like something that they've experienced. And if you have had those symptoms and you resonate with them and you want to start feeling better, there's no reason, whether you have a diagnosis or not, that you can't start working on them. It's a process of learning to be aware and of learning to calm your triggers. And you can do that whether or not you have access to professional help, whether or not your provider is knowledgeable enough to even know about CPTSD, and whether or not they even believe you that you're having these symptoms. If they believe you, and they'll guide you toward good treatment that helps you, great. If they dismiss you and say you're just depressed or anxious or a hypochondriac, you can still heal your symptoms. You own your healing. The second reason why I believe a diagnosis isn't strictly necessary to start your healing is that CPTSD, like many other mental health problems, doesn't mean the same thing to all people. According to a study conducted in 2019 at the University of Liverpool in the UK, and this was published in the scientific journal Psychiatry Research, most psychiatric diagnoses are scientifically meaningless, and to quote the study, worthless as tools to accurately identify and address mental distress at an individual level. You heard that right. The researchers analyzed 5 chapters in Britain's DSM. That's the diagnostic manual that they use in the UK to determine who has what and then what treatment should be administered. They looked at bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, and also at trauma-related disorders. And they noticed first that there was a lot of overlap in symptoms across these different diagnoses, even though each diagnosis uses different decision rules. Second, the researchers found that the diagnoses completely ignore the role of trauma in a person's life, which makes their symptoms into not very good indicators of what's really going on for them. And worse, it doesn't tell you what treatments might be helpful. The conclusion was that, in the words of the researchers, this diagnostic labeling approach is a disingenuous categorical system. Now, one of the things this study talks about is that diagnostic criteria wrongly assume sometimes that all mental distress is caused by a disorder. And they say that this relies too much on old ideas about what's considered normal. And one of the authors, John Reed, says, and I got to read this to you, just a minute. Perhaps it's time we stopped pretending that medical-sounding labels contribute anything to our understanding of the complex causes of human distress or of what kind of help we need when we are distressed. So it's worth pointing out that among all the diagnoses they analyzed, complex PTSD probably has the least developed treatment standards. In the diagnostic manual, it's still lumped in with standard PTSD here in the US, so it doesn't have its own treatment officially. And I know one function of an official diagnosis is that it becomes a code that a healthcare institution can put in the computer in order to authorize treatment for you and get reimbursed by your insurance, and that's important. So it feels like a diagnosis really is important, but there are a dozen reasons why, when it comes to benefiting you, that diagnosis is not necessarily meaningful. What is always meaningful, regardless of what's happening with your doctor or your insurance, is your symptoms. These are real phenomena that you can notice and you can start working on them, whether you've got top-notch care or you're stuck in a 2-year queue in some health system to get assigned to a provider, or even if you have no professional help at all. And that's what my courses are for, is to help you be aware of the signs and symptoms that might be affecting you and to start using simple techniques to calm those symptoms, calm your PTSD triggers, and start changing specific problems in your life. So unless you've been involuntarily committed, It's your right to take charge like this and to consult professionals when you need them. They don't give you your healing. They help you to follow your own healing path. And this way of viewing it is far more empowering than waiting to be helped or waiting to be understood or being angry that the help that was given to you just didn't work. You gotta keep trying, keep reaching out. You are in the driver's seat. Now, the third reason I suggest that you focus on healing your symptoms rather than just on your diagnosis is that it frees you from the identity of a person with a mental disorder. If you're experiencing the common symptoms of CPTSD and you had trauma, you're normal. These symptoms are a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. Your trauma is something that happened. Your being is something else entirely. You are not your trauma. You are you, and you have the power right now to take steps towards healing. If you've been in a position where you felt helpless and you were waiting or depending on doctors and therapists to make it better for you, and yet you're still struggling, I know that's hard. But it's so important that you don't give in to despair. Lots of us didn't respond to conventional treatment, but we do respond to other techniques and strategies, and you can learn about them by Googling or joining online communities and talking to other people who've healed. Now, one thing you can do is what I did, and I call it my daily practice. It's a simple set of techniques. I teach them in a free short online course that you can access from a link below in the description section, and it helps to heal brain dysregulation from childhood PTSD. And it helps you get a better footing for taking any other kind of healing steps that you want to try. Now, I've got more advanced courses too, and links to those are also in the description section. But I want to say, you had trauma and you are strong. You have a mind that you can use to direct your own healing. You have the internet, and with a little research, you can make good choices about who's going to help you. If you can't access the treatment you hoped for because of wait lists or costs, there are others where you don't need authorization or even insurance coverage to just start working on your healing right now. My website has a bunch of things you can try. It has a resources page. Be courageous about moving your healing forward, one step at a time. That's the way it's done, and you can do it too.
So going back over the letter, I wanted to ask a question about an emotionally unavailable man I have an interest in. It's more like an obsession. So right there, I'm going to say, yes, it's more like an obsession. And this diagnosis of him as emotionally unavailable, I think that might be a misapplication of that. Now, he might be, he might not be. What he is, I'm just going to tell you right up front, he's shown no sign of being interested in you. You got one contact from him on social media. And it sounds like that's the only time he ever indicated an interest in talking to you. All right, so an emotionally unavailable person, usually that would be somebody who you're in a relationship with and they try to be in the relationship, but they can't love you or they can't be present for you. But this is somebody who's just flat out unavailable. It's not just emotional, he's not there. He's not even in your life. You haven't had contact in 4 years. So this is a big clue that this is a limerent relationship, okay? And then you say he has a public image because he's wealthy. Well, so people who are wealthy probably get a lot more than the normal share of people who are interested in them. And that's something to ask yourself. And sometimes the reason, if he's artistic and wealthy, you're not giving information about him, and I appreciate that. We don't really know, but if he is well known and wealthy for his artistic abilities and he's very visible and known, then sometimes that is a super attractive quality and sometimes could set off limerence. And when people have that highly visible profile, it's easy to feel like we know them, even when they don't really know us. But I get that you were acquainted. So you knew each other through common friends, but never really got to know each other. There was no friendship. So big clue there. There is not even a friendship. You don't actually know each other. When you wanted to pursue a relationship with him and you say, yeah, I know it's unhealthy to chase a guy. Well, chasing a guy, trying to get a friend to set you up with somebody, that's not inherently unhealthy. I think it might not be strategic, but it's, that's not the part that's limerent. You were hoping your friend would fix you up. the thing is here, he didn't bite. He didn't respond to that. So whether your friend did anything, he had his chance to be interested in you, and he wasn't. And I know that might be painful to hear, Elizabeth, but I just see no evidence that he is interested in you at all, or was when he had the chance to meet you. This happened some years ago, and I think you're saying it started like 12 years ago. It went on until 5 years ago. And you say you were very unhealthy back then. You had a string of toxic relationships. You had crippling anxiety and self-esteem issues. So yeah, sounds like you have CPTSD. It showed up in your relationships. And when we're in that state, when you're having horrible relationships that are making you miserable and you're having crippling anxiety and your self-esteem is bad, limerent relationships are just delicious. You know, they look so good because you can kind of escape all of this. You can escape the plane where everything's a struggle and imagine this happy relationship where you get your emotional needs met. And I know you're going to be talking about your parents here. And I think that's a huge clue too, that your mom was totally self-centered, couldn't be there for you. Your dad was unavailable. So I see this again and again. I'm learning so much. And it's not like it was unknown to the world or to the people who are professionals in this field. But what happens when you're a kid, I just keep seeing this pattern of CPTSD where somebody wasn't even real to their parents and they become very vulnerable to relationships that aren't real. And if you know what I mean by real, like for parents to see the reality of their kid, they know who you are, they know how you feel, they care about it. They're down there on the floor with you, working out problems and helping you understand yourself and loving you and helping you form self-esteem at the same time as having self-awareness to know when you're not sharing your toys. So it sounds like if your parents couldn't do that for you, there's a way that a person doesn't feel real. And I just keep seeing this over and over again. So we're going to talk about how you can become more real. So you were chasing him then, and he didn't seem interested. And I'm just going to say, since it didn't result in any kind of dating or anything, this is the tough love, Elizabeth. He wasn't interested. If a guy is interested in you, he will show up. He will let you know. He'll be present. He'll ask you out. So he wasn't interested. It wasn't just seem. But that's the limerence going, well, you know, there's no evidence that he's interested, but I'm looking for signs. I'm feeling something. We have so much in common. Some people go into magical thinking. They think about like, you know, in reality, he doesn't realize it yet, but we're, you know, soulmates, or he doesn't realize it yet, but we had a past life together. There's a lot of ways that we trick ourselves into so that we can keep obsessing on somebody because it's giving us comfort in a horrible emptiness. And just like a drug, it can kind of like get you off the hook in the moment, but it ends up leading to greater emptiness down the line. And that's what's happening here. You still haven't had the kind of relationship that made you happy. So let's assume that's the goal here and keep looking at what happened with this guy, Max, in light of that, of how we can help you move towards it. So then you said he coped with his issues using alcohol, and then he got sober, and your friend said so, but you're not sure that he did. Well, so that's interesting. You're obsessing on somebody who has alcoholism, and many of us have done that, but it's just, you know, it's just a fact. Somebody who's an alcoholic is very unlikely to be a good partner. Somebody who has, you know, you go on to say he has he has alcoholism, he has toxic relationships, he has issues. So it sounds like even if he were interested in you, the chances of having a great relationship with him are, you know, he's not in that place. But there's the main problem, and that is that he's not interested enough to even stay in touch with you, okay? That's the main thing. So whether he drinks or not is not even your concern anymore. He's not in your life. So after a while, you stopped being interested in him and you found someone nice, but broke up soon after. Yeah, that's what we do. After the breakup, Max contacted you on social media and asked to talk over the phone. Okay, so there's the big moment you were waiting for, but you were not in a good mental space. You had had a breakup. There was a family death. You were feeling terrible, and you said, I can't talk to you right now, but will you talk to me later? And you thought he would, but he didn't. You haven't heard from him since then. That was 2017. So I would say if you've been kind of pursuing a guy for, what was that, 7 years, and he never took an interest, and then one day he calls you, he reaches out and says, oh, give me a call. But when you say you can't talk right then, or you need a little time and he doesn't call back, I would just say, I don't know what that call was, but it wasn't any big thing where he realized that you were the one for him. If he did feel that way, he would have called you back. Because again, if a person is interested in you, and I'm saying this to everybody, a man or a woman, they will let you know. If they're interested, they'll let you know, especially if it's safe to be interested. So the one case where people sometimes keep these things secret is if they don't think you like them. But if you've been pursuing them for years, they know, and they will let you know if they feel the same way. And he didn't. Okay? It's sad, but there it is. And this is good. It's really good. You know, sometimes just a clear fact is so helpful to set us free so that we can move on and actually have real love, right? So this is a good thing. This is how sometimes the news you fear is the happy news. Because you go, yay, you're free, you're free. You can stop obsessing on a ghost, right? All right, so then you said a couple years after that, you moved out of the country he lives in. You sent a goodbye message, he didn't reply. So there's your 100% confirmation, all right? He's not in your life. He's not in communication with you. He could be, but he chooses not to be, all right? So now you're back in your native country, and you came back to live with your mom because you wanted to give her a chance. And it's been a huge disappointment. You know, so you're in your late 30s, and so a couple years ago, you were still in your late 30s. So it's interesting to me that you would make a move for the sake of your mom at that time. But I don't know, that's probably another story. But I get the sense of you kind of traveling around the globe, trying to find the love that's going to help you get your needs met. I mean, your dad wasn't there at all, and she was narcissistic. So yeah, you probably hoped. I get it. Yeah, you wanted love. You wanted love, and that's always what it is. Everything bad I've ever done, everything dysfunctional I've ever did, I did because I needed love and I was lonely. So I think a lot of people can relate to that. So it's okay. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're showing a common pattern that people get from trauma. So you say, sometimes I think of Max and what could have been between us, and I'm not sure if this is healthy. I think that sometimes thinking of people from the past, there's no problem with that. But when you keep thinking what could have been, I think you have your answer about that. And that's the fantasy. It's just a temptation to go visit this fantasy where you are loved and everything's wonderful with this, you know, and artistically free. And you say you're artistic, and maybe you're just not telling me stuff here, but I'm not hearing anything in your life where that artistry is expressed. And I think that happens too around trauma, is that I believe you that you have artistic ability, but it's kind of hooked onto this other person. Like, if we could just be together, I could set free this gift I have for art. And that's really common, but it's not true. There is a such thing as people who create a life or an environment for you that allow you to set your gifts free, but they're never the ones who treat you like crap. They're never the ones who just don't even return your calls. That would not be it. So then you say, you remind me that he's 45, not married and with no kids. You're 39. So yes, those are marriageable ages. That would be ideal, except let's go back to the main fact. He chooses not to have any contact with you and doesn't know you. Okay. So yes, you said goodbye. He didn't reply. You don't know him well. But from experience you've had about men in general, he's not toxic or unsafe. So Elizabeth, I'm just going to say, I think you should handle that with tender hands, because I mean to say, hold it lightly. That in your past experience, you haven't had good judgment about who's toxic or unsafe. You've had a string of terrible relationships. And so if you're like the rest of us with CPTSD that isn't healed yet, it's just not something you're very good at detecting in advance. It's really common. You didn't do anything wrong. The way that you were raised inevitably almost results in that kind of broken red flag detector. But when you say, I don't know, from what you're saying, there's no evidence that he's not toxic or not or unsafe. And the drinking in particular, I mean, somebody with a problem with alcohol is inherently toxic and unsafe. Now, they might recover, but again, if somebody who you had a relationship with had alcoholism, and you were hoping that they would get sober, if they got sober, that would just be like the beginning of a very long road on the question of, are they a suitable person for you? When alcoholism is active, the answer is no. The answer is never yes with an active alcoholic. It's just a huge barrier to a real happy relationship or having your emotional needs met. That's why alcoholism is such a bummer for the person who has it and the person who tries to love the alcoholic. So It's a challenge. Sometimes people are already married to an alcoholic and they have children and they're invested, and there's all kinds of reasons to then, go to Al-Anon and learn how to live with the alcoholism and find peace, whether the alcoholic stops drinking or not, right? But if this person is not even your friend, I'm just saying, honey, no, don't pursue relationships with alcoholics. Now that we live in different countries and don't have any contact with each other on social media, I'm not sure if something's ever going to happen. No, there's no evidence that anything's going to happen, and even if it did, it would be random, out of the blue, from somebody you don't really know. So I'm going to strongly encourage you to set yourself free from any hope in this relationship so that you can have hope in real relationships. So then you say, my question is this: is what I feel for him limerence, which is obsession with the idea of a person, or healthy, mature love? And I'm just going to say, by definition, this is limerence, because what you're into is the idea of him. You don't even have a friendship with him. It's not possible to have healthy, mature love for somebody you don't know. That could be admiration, that could be attraction, that could be obsession, but it can't be healthy, mature love. Healthy, mature love is by definition a mutual thing between people who know each other, who care about each other, who are invested in the best for each other, who are present for each other. That's healthy, mature love. So let's go with limerence. You diagnosed it yourself. And then you say, is it worth saving myself up for him? Or should I just bite the bullet and admit to myself that this was a fantasy that I indulged in and I only got crumbs from it? There again, you see it, Elizabeth. I know you see it. It is the latter. It's a fantasy you indulged in and you only got crumbs from it. You barely even got crumbs. I mean, one contact. And then when you asked, is it worth saving myself for him? So there's this noble idea of saving yourself for someone, and saving yourself for someone who's actually committed to you is one thing, but saving yourself for a person you don't even really know or have a friendship with, I would say that's more in the category of avoidance. You're protecting yourself. You find it safer to be in the fantasy of future love versus all the difficulty and the slog of actual people love. And I can see why you feel that way, but if you want real love, the path to it is to come back down from the fantasy, back down to earth, back to the real men of the world who you meet, who right now you're judging as boring. But believe me, there are all kinds of men in the world. There are men who have everything that you listed about yourself in common. They have that in common with you too. And they're available for a relationship. And you have the opportunity, you're at an age where it's entirely easy to date men and learn if there is some kind of mutual feeling there that could grow into real mature love. Real mature love takes time to develop, and it's pretty hard to accomplish when you're still in so much pain and self-esteem difficulty and, just the crazy-making phenomenon of CPTSD. When you're in that, it's pretty hard to have healthy, mature love, because instead what there is what some people call attachment hunger, right? You're just like, I really want to be attached, can't deal with real men, but there's this guy I don't really know, and I just remember my idea of him, and it's so beautiful, and I want to be in that idea, but it's an idea. So back to earth, back to all of us boring earthlings here. We're not boring. We're actually quite wonderful, colorful, different, interesting, and the reason people seem boring is because right now you're kind of high on a fantasy. And just as somebody, let's say they were addicted to heroin, okay? If they were addicted to heroin and they were hanging around a bunch of people who were spending the holiday together and they weren't high on anything and they didn't drink, they would think that was boring too. In fact, alcoholics think people who aren't drunk are boring. So effectively, some people would call this a form of love addiction, and I'm just sort of going to put a question mark, like, is it an addiction? I don't know. It's an attachment wound. It's an attachment wound. It's certainly, it quacks like a duck. It acts like an addiction. This limerent idea, it's like an addiction. And when you're in your addictive behavior, Everything that's not that is going to feel boring. Nothing can seem to get in there. And that's part of what makes it so hard to be in a limerent state, is like you can't taste anything, you can't smell anything, metaphorically speaking, you can't feel anything. No one's getting through, you're not getting through. A huge part of yourself is kind of up in this fog here, where you're imagining the relationship that you might have and you're not experiencing the person who's right in front of you. And so it can be painful, it can be like withdrawal to come back down out of that cloud and just be on earth and start paying attention to people. And usually if the difficulty for you has been with men, then women friends are going to be good. If your mom has been difficult for you, a lot of people with difficult moms don't feel a lot of trust with women, or they don't feel affinity, and they find it easier to be friends with men. And so one thing you're always going to hear me recommend is to find groups such as 12-step programs, because often if you've been in an obsessive relationship, there's often financial catastrophe following that. If you can't be present on earth, well, earning a living is an earth thing. So unless you're independently wealthy, I'm guessing this is an area that's hard for you. So you can go to 12-step fellowships. They're free. There's group therapy. There's ways that you can be together with just women or men and women. But something where there's no possibility of romance, where you can just begin to practice connecting with other people and practice being real. Because that's what I wanted to address. The little bit you told me about your childhood, the narcissistic mom, the unavailable dad, how I see you as somebody, you're having trouble feeling the reality of yourself. You are a real flesh and blood woman. You crave love like all human beings. You want to be loved by a real person who can actually love you, not an idea. And you're just having trouble like connecting the reality of yourself to a real person. So you practice real relationships with people. And there's a way back. You practice telling the truth. You practice saying how you really feel, because part of being in a limerent relationship is always kind of pretending you're not as obsessed as you actually are in there. And so there's this way you're always sort of translating how you really feel into something you think is socially acceptable. One of the signs of limerence is that when you talk to your friends about this person you're so excited about, they're always like, they're acting like, oh gosh, we're sick of hearing about this guy, or they're worried about you when you talk about him. They're not quite on board with it. That's a sign. And obviously there would be exceptions, like some friends just can't get behind some love interest. But in this case, 7 years of pursuing a guy and he wasn't interested at all. I'm guessing your friends were sort of like getting a little tired of your quest, right? So pay attention to what people think and become yourself. Start telling the truth. Those friends in that other country, they're not around. Where you are right now, there are people in groups who you can get together with and you can just talk about this. You can say, I feel like I want to go on a date. What I'm worried about is this. Or you can say, I'm having memories about this guy. I would try to avoid social situations or groups where continuing to talk about or think about this guy, Max, is encouraged or tolerated. That sometimes is my unique perspective, and some people don't like it, but I'm telling you, if you want to get over anybody, whether they were actually in your life or that it's a limerent thing, stop talking about them. Number one, stop talking about them. Number two, make yourself stop thinking about them. When you catch yourself thinking about them, say, I gotta stop thinking about that. And give yourself a few go-to things that you can put your mind on. A nice piece of music, a cold drink of water, run up and down the stairs, or some happy memory, something that comforts you, where you can just push your mind instead. It's kind of hard to 100% control your mind, but go in this direction. Just take him off your mind. When they say that phrase, wash that man out of your hair, that's how you do it. You wash him out of your thinking. You wash him out of your thoughts. Thinking about him is you leaving your life. It's you going off. Because it's not just a fantasy, is it? It's kind of like the world of the dead. It's a world where there is no love and there is no interaction. And there is no contact. It's like the world of the dead. So come back, Elizabeth. Come back to the world of the living where we can love you and we can hear you. Okay? So one thing you said that I thought was important here, you said, I feel if I don't cut ties with him, I'll wait for that social media message from him for the rest of my life and will stay single forever. You don't even have ties with him to cut, but the ties that you have with him are mental with the idea of him. And that is, I would totally encourage you to cut those ties. It'll be sad at first, but you'll be surprised how quickly it feels better. It feels like clean. It feels peaceful to cut ties with an idea that's been torturing you. And that's what I'm hearing. You had said that it's safer to stay in the past because you know what to expect from it. I know how it will go. I just don't see anything safe about being alone for the rest of your life. That doesn't sound very safe at all. Change is unpredictable, and it does give you anxiety, and I totally understand it. The future is bumpy and bright. It's both wonderful and scary, and that's a fact. We're all going to get hurt again, here and there. But as you continue to recover and you keep yourself out of fantasy and here on earth, you can start to grow your open-hearted capacity to be solid with 2 feet on the ground and showing love. And that's the kind of person a healthy person can love. And I want you to have a healthy person. I can only imagine what a trauma that would have been. Even if you can't remember it, it would definitely have gone in there about your sense of safety in the world and how much love there was to go around. So when you were 2, she ran away with you to the US, which I guess was another country. And I guess that would have been the end of your relationship with your dad. For your mom, I'm sure it was quite a trauma having to run away and go to a new country. So she would have been stressed. And then anytime that you did stuff she didn't like, if you were just acting up like a kid, she would call you, "You are your father's daughter, aren't you?" And that hurt. Yes, that is a huge insult. That's a projection by her of things that your father has done onto an innocent child. And anybody with a brain knows that, of course, the baby is not responsible for the father's behavior. So that is such a put down. And I know that for a lot of us who got told that, I also got told that a little bit at times, but it's like you become ashamed. You become ashamed of who you are and you're not even sure. I remember one person who wrote a letter to me some months ago, said she would look in the mirror and look for her father's features and go, "Oh, there they are, they're right about me." It's not cool, not a good thing to do. It's emotional abuse. You went through every kind of abuse that a person can go through, every kind you emphasize, and I guess I can read between the lines of what that is. But the damage is done, you say, and every time you think you've healed, you enter into another relationship that models the one you had with both parents. All right, that's what we do. Sounds like you're normal. I'm at the point where I'm just so exhausted. You either get neglected and abandoned or manipulated, controlled, and put down and just actively treated like shit. Okay. So those are the 2 variations that you've observed before, and you're about to tell me about a relationship that you feel is different. You can kind of see where I'm going here. Okay, here's the things you've tried. You've tried therapy. You've watched hours of videos on YouTube. Journal, meditate, sit with the feelings. Took a year off of dating. You've even taken a year off of dating to focus on yourself after ending a relationship. When you realized it was the same pattern of tolerating mistreatment and accepting crumbs. Had a few dates recently with people who seemed secure, but you didn't feel interested and they didn't seem interested and there was no second date. All right, so what I wanted to say about that, about things you've tried, Luna, is you don't say how old you are, but I'm guessing you're fairly young, maybe in your 20s, because the things you've tried, they don't sound like you've gone very deep yet. And that's really hopeful because that means that everything you listed could have gone a little deeper, like you've tried therapy. I don't know how much you did. I'm somebody who didn't benefit from therapy, but many people do. But I wouldn't expect the depth of trauma that you've been through. That's just something, it's got so many layers. So I would really say if a person goes to therapy or tries journaling or meditation or anything, yes, you should expect to feel better, somewhat better. But then, changing the patterns and really kind of healing the deep-rooted stuff, especially when it happened before you can remember, that stuff, it's a process of healing that. So what I'm saying is it's totally okay that you're not all the way healed yet. The pattern is going to keep showing up until the wound is healed. And people say that as if like, oh, you bad person, you needed to go in there and heal the wound. Why haven't you yet? It's because it's mysterious. It's elusive. Many of us actually do get that healing, but it takes a lot of persistence sometimes. It takes practice. One part of your life will get a lot better, and then you'll go, oh, this other part of my life, I'm still struggling. That's the journey. Don't despair. Because no matter what you're going through with healing and still suffering, all of it is leading to this sort of deepening and strengthening of you as a person. The whole process is good. Now that you're on the other side, you're out of the bad relationship. You are on the other side now, and everything here can be better. Everything can be better. So don't despair that things you've tried haven't worked. And sometimes it's the specific kind of therapy or technique that you use. I know it was for me. Like, I tried everything. I thought nothing worked. Then I learned the techniques that I teach that are called the daily practice. And boom, within like 2 weeks, I had a huge transformation. I had a transformation that changed my ability to stay regulated and sort of gave me the capacity to feel happy to be alive, which was huge, but it didn't immediately solve my problems with relationships. That took practice. And, what you get here on my channel is, decades of experience learning the hard way how not to do things and what does work. And I distill it down into videos and courses and coaching programs, hoping that someone like you can kind of cut through the clutter and through the rabbit holes that I went down that didn't work and go right to what does work. And what does work always includes an element of facing what is really happening, just facing what's really happening. You're doing a very good job of noticing, okay, the pattern is repeating. Step one, right? Why is it repeating? How does that pattern get back into your life? And that is usually getting in the portal for that bad thing to get back in and sort of twist your thinking and get you stuck in another bad situation. It comes when you're feeling magical thinking, when you're going into a fog of denial. I'm listing a number of things that, people with CPTSD do. Or we've had it so bad before that the littlest bit of niceness seems like a step up, and that might be the category that I put you in. Okay, number one mistake that you don't want to make is don't make your CPTSD your identity, all right? The trauma in your life happened to you, but it is not you. You are not your trauma. You are a complete, full human being who had some bad stuff happen to you. And that stuff affected you, and it caused an injury. But I'm going to invite you to believe with all your heart that it's an injury and not an identity. And that healing, I want you to know this in your bones, healing is possible. It's possible for you to heal the brain changes that happen to you. It's possible for you to change the behavioral patterns that so many of us end up with after living a life with that brain injury. The brain injury produces something called dysregulation. Dysregulation makes it very hard for us sometimes to process information and emotions. They come in funny, they come out funny, and it complicates how we get educated. It complicates the way we have relationships. And we end up feeling really bad and like we're never going to be okay. But you know what? You can become somebody who learns well. You can become somebody who has a good relationship because you are you. You are not your trauma. So my approach is to heal the symptoms caused by the trauma in the past. If you can take your focus and put it on the symptoms, then you've just taken one giant step towards disidentifying from your trauma. When I first started to heal, I was going to a 12-step program for families of alcoholics. And technically, I am an adult child of an alcoholic. That is true. But I'm not really a child, and the alcoholic has not been alive for 30 years, so really, I can't say that I'm affected by that directly anymore. I definitely was hurt as a kid, and I think that did cause some dysregulation and some attachment problems for me, and that all manifested as my CPTSD. So that happened. These things are real, but I was able to heal those symptoms without ever bringing my mom back to life. My mom died about the same month that I went to my first 12-step meeting and that I was also shown how to do this daily practice that helped me so much. That's not a coincidence. Her dying prompted me to go get help for a lot of pain that I had about how it had been growing up and how really neglected I had been and how much she had not been available to protect me from abuse from other family members because of her drinking. So my first 6 months or so going to meetings, I was crying every day, which is normal and healthy. I was telling my story. I was kind of waking up about the seriousness of stuff that had happened and remembering little incidents, and I'd hear other people sharing about it, and I was discovering, wow, I'm not alone. But I think it was at about 6 months, it was like, okay, I really need to feel better now. Now, I had the good fortune back then to be shown two techniques that I call the daily practice. If you've watched any of my videos, I talk about them all the time. They help me so much, and that's why I'm always offering them to you. It's a free course. You can get that in the link just below this video in the description section. Daily practice, free course. Takes less than an hour to learn, but it's a writing and a meditation technique. And it saved my life. I learned another way to get my feelings, my negative feelings, like out of here, out of my heart, out of my mind, and onto paper. It very quickly became something that worked about 10 times better for me than the therapy I was doing. And eventually I quit therapy and I continued with this practice of writing. I needed something that I could do all the time. And so one of the benefits of the daily practice done all the time in my early recovery was that it helped me disidentify. Instead of coming in and just being like, oh my gosh, this happened. The year that I got the daily practice, my mother died, my brother died, a person I loved more than anybody in the world ended the relationship with me. I was going through an extremely hard time and I needed somewhere for those feelings to go. Talking about it was making me feel worse. Dwelling on it was making me feel worse. Denying it wasn't even an option. It was so much for me to deal with. I was overwhelmed emotionally. And so then I had a technique where I could get it onto paper. And this is what I've taught now, 30, 40,000 of people here through YouTube who have signed up for my free course. Teach it. And I just get letters all day long that it's helped other people too. I don't know if it'll help you, but the one way that you can find out is to try it. It's very, very simple, very compatible with anything else you're doing. But it helps you to go, I have fear, I have resentment. You get it on paper and you stop identifying with that. It's not that you're denying your feelings, but you're not identifying with them anymore. And you're not identifying with what happened to you. And when you have less fear and resentment about what happened to you, you know what comes in? More and more awareness of who you are now. Who you are now is the person who can actually have fun, who can have relationships, who can earn money. You want to be you now. That's who you want to be, is you now. And it just needs to be less painful to come into present time and get out of the memories and the fantasies of the future. And fantasies can be negative too. You can be very afraid of the future. That's a fantasy. So getting caught up in, oh, the past was terrible, the future's dreadful. You can't be the person who has fun and is alive and makes money and moves around and eats peaches. I'm talking about peaches because today the ripe peaches came out and I'm just like, yay, my life just got one notch better. I love peaches. Here now is where you want to be. You don't want to be identified with your trauma. You are not your trauma. Number 2, don't give away your power to heal. Okay? You're thinking, I don't give away my power to heal, but here's what I mean by that. I get letters all day long from people who are angry that people who hurt them haven't apologized. Therapists they've seen have not figured out how to make them heal. Doctors they went to didn't understand trauma. Now, I am so sorry that this is a world where it's so hard to get understood as a person with CPTSD. And for right now, that is just a fact. You go to the doctor, chances are small. Even if they say they know what it is, they probably don't. At least they're beginning to do these little tiny trainings for people. But what they teach them may not include stuff that's relevant to you. For example, dysregulation. So few clinical professionals know really what dysregulation is. Not just emotional dysregulation, but nervous system dysregulation that is really the root cause of almost every symptom. When they notice that we say, oh yeah, no, I'll definitely quit smoking. I know it's bad for me, and then we fail to do it. See, they think we don't care. But actually, we're too dysregulated. And stuff like cigarettes and a lot of addictions actually are ways that we can temporarily hold on to a little bit of regulation, even though in the end it sabotages dysregulation. I know that's why I smoke 2 packs a day. By the way, I have this sheet that you can download and give your doctor, and it's called 12 Things I Wish My Doctor Understood About CPTSD. I'm going to throw that link down in the description section too, so you have that. I think a lot of people have found that helpful. And it's really exciting. More than 1,000 doctors have downloaded it. I'm very psyched about that. You just have to have patience with the world right now. You're the one who's forging ahead like a pioneer to learn about what this thing is. And once you hear the symptoms and you go, that is what I have, you're the pioneer. you're going to have to turn around and educate people around you, and half of them are not going to want to know. A lot of clinicians are going to feel challenged or threatened because you think you know what's wrong with you. I wouldn't even bother. Like, if you can possibly get to the really cool doctors and therapists who are like, yeah, I want to know what it is. Yeah, you read something helpful. Tell me what it is. I would like to know more. That's a good doctor, by the way. People who want to know more, who don't consider themselves to already know everything there is to know. And especially when it comes to CPTSD, those of us who have it have a unique perspective, and we need to be at the table when people are trying to figure out like what to do about CPTSD. So I've just found a lot of like formal programs out there. They do many things well, but it tends to be more the things that are obvious or that you can see from the outside. And they don't understand the sort of inner workings. And the key thing that I often don't see is the dysregulation of just understanding how when a person with CPTSD gets dysregulated, like triggered and upset, the reasoning goes down. There's this temporary inability to really think straight and a temporary intense emotional feeling. It comes back, and we can train ourselves to kind of keep it in balance. So that's what we're doing here. So when I say don't give away your power to heal, I mean don't waste all your energy on being mad at the world for not understanding you, because you've just given them your power. Like, come on, world, heal me. Come on, doctor, why haven't you healed me? Come on, this therapist, they didn't get me at all. Well, they can't, all right? That information about what we have is only beginning to be published. Everyone with CPTSD who heals from CPTSD is going to have an opportunity to communicate effectively and change this consciousness. You know, in 10, 20 years, this could be a very different thing. And maybe then I can retire. But until then, I'm teaching and teaching and teaching. Like, this is what it feels like to have it. This is what is known about it. And I'm not the end all be all of what's known about it. I try to keep up with things. But mostly I'm a person who has it, who's learned how to treat it in myself. I treat myself as sovereign. Sovereign means the queen or king, in your case, perhaps. I am the sovereign of my own healing. And I hire help from consultants such as doctors, therapists. I don't do therapy anymore, but I would if I thought it was a good idea in any particular thing. I hire their professional help to help me with a project of healing that I'm in charge with. This is my ship. I'm the captain. And if something's not working for me, I stop. And if I'm curious about something, I try it. I ask questions. But I take charge of that. And the reason I've had a lot of success finding what works for me is because I tried 1,000 things. I tried and tried and tried. I tried many things that weren't helpful to me. I tried a lot of things that are very helpful to other people, but not for me. I used to just feel terrible, like, what's wrong with me? It's like, nothing's wrong with me. We're each a little different. The way we manifest our CPTSD is a little different. This is not a perfectly measured science yet. We learn what works for us by trying, and we, learn to do that in a boundaried way. And so stick around this channel to keep learning, like, how do you do that? How do you keep learning how you can identify your triggers, how you can calm them down? And you will be amazed at how much power you actually have to make your life change because you develop the ability to calm your triggers. Your triggers are what empower every bad thing about CPTSD. They make you get dysregulated. They make you get disconnected. They make you act out with self-defeating behaviors. Triggers are the problem. So if you can start to notice, whoops, here I go, I'm getting triggered. Stop. I'm not going to say stuff. I'm going to refrain from trying to solve a problem when I'm triggered and dysregulated. I'm going to get myself re-regulated, and then I'm going to proceed. I kid you not, you can change the course of your life by using tools to catch yourself when you're triggered, get re-regulated, and then proceed. And everyone will be grateful to you for that change in you. They might pressure you in the moment, like, oh, this is such a nuisance having you have to get re-regulated. Yeah, well, don't listen. They really, they'll realize soon enough that they didn't really like the dysregulated you. But you're going to have so much more success in anything you try to do, whether it's to keep healing yourself, to be creative, to make money, to have a family, like all the things that you might be desiring in your heart to do start to become accessible to you when you have mastery over your dysregulation. That comes from you being sovereign, all right? It's very unlikely somebody's going to just like plop that in your lap. You can heal whether or not your insurance covers treatment. You can heal whether or not you have help, professional help. You can heal whether or not the professional help you have is with people who understand it. You can heal. You can do this. So that's number 2. Keep your power. You own this. This is your healing. The third mistake that people make about CPTSD, not to make, don't keep talking and talking and talking about the past. Now, isn't that funny? Because for basically the last 100 years, people who had emotional or psychological problems were told, you need to talk about it. Do you have someone to talk to? Why don't you talk to somebody good about that? That is just common sense advice. We were all raised on it. So what happens if, like me, you ended up finding that when you do go talk to somebody about it, you don't get better. And in fact, you start to feel really upset and stressed when you try to talk about it. Well, now we know. That is not true for everybody, but with CPTSD, it's fairly common. And it's dysregulation. Once again, it's dysregulation triggered by talking about trauma. And that's how trauma works. When trauma is lingering in your nervous system, yes, it can be triggered and set off. It can be set off by seeing something, smelling something, right? Hearing something. And it can be set off by talking about it, revisiting the memory. And it turns out that talking about a memory uses a certain pathway in the brain, and somewhere on that pathway is that little trigger. But it's possible for you to communicate what happened to you, to visit it, communicate it, share it with another person. You can do that without talking about it by writing about it and then reading what you wrote. All right? James Pennebaker at University of Texas, Austin, has done decades of research on this. He was doing it not necessarily about trauma, but about the therapeutic value of writing. And it's surprisingly powerful when people are writing about thoughts that bother them. Well, here at Crappy Childhood Fairyland, we use a specific writing technique called the daily practice. And it's specific. And the specific technique involves writing fearful and resentful thoughts, asking for them to be removed, and then following it with meditation. And I just want to say, this is very different. It's very different than talking, all right? It's very different than journaling. Journaling is about recording those thoughts. The techniques we use are about discarding those thoughts. They're about getting them on paper so you can stop thinking them, get rid of them, trusting that anything that you actually need to remember or do or respond to that's visiting your fears today is going to come back to you. Your mind is merely going to get clearer, not blank, not empty, just clearer, so that a lot of the free-floating anxiety and things you don't actually need to worry about, they poof, they evaporate. Some things you do need to worry about, like, wow, I forgot to make my follow-up appointment at the dentist. I've got to do that. Or things that are even more crucial. So when you have a clear mind that's not all cluttered up with fear and resentment, you can remember better, you can prioritize better, you can even make a conscious decision about how you will use your mind in a given moment. Like, that's really weird. The first time that happened to me, I didn't even recognize it. But basically, when you're dysregulated and CPTSD has hold of your thinking, you're never really in charge of what you're thinking about. You know, you're trying to use it. Somebody says, here, you know, fill out this worksheet. And you go, okay, and you start doing it. But very quickly, your mind is wandering. Or you're sitting in a group of people and people are having a discussion and you're listening to them, but very quickly your mind is wandering. And usually it's going inside to fearful, resentful thoughts. What does she mean by that? Hey, these guys are friends. I think these people all have plans for lunch and they didn't invite me. So these little hamsters on the hamster wheel are just going, going, going. And you can barely or partially only pay attention to what's going on around you. And that's going to limit your happiness. It's going to limit your effectiveness and participation in life. Instead of talking about that trouble, you take it to the paper. Now, I love these techniques because they involve a pen and a paper, and in so many settings, there is nothing weird about sitting there writing on a pad of paper. You can do it in the theater, you can do it in the office, you can do it on a train. Nobody bats an eye. You're not just standing on your head or doing some funny eye-catching technique. You're just doing something that nobody notices. But privately, what you're doing is you're releasing a bunch of fearful and resentful thoughts that are cluttering your perception so that you can think clearly, you can have lucidity, you can have calmness. Those are the fruits of when you stop talking about your trauma. Now, I don't want to knock it. It is necessary to talk sometimes about your trauma. It's so important to tell your story in whatever form you decide to tell it. Almost everybody's healing begins with acknowledging what happened and telling at least one other person, this is what happened to me. Some people write a book. Some people join a group. Some people go tell a therapist. Some people finally tell a spouse. It's all good that we do it sometimes, but it's just that when it goes on and on and on, it can be fruitless. It's not the way that all of your healing is going to come. And I think that in a lot of cases, for the last however many decades, therapy has been set up on the assumption that if you could just keep talking about it, you would eventually have a breakthrough. And I assume a lot of people have had that breakthrough, or else there wouldn't even be therapy. I mean, it's so prevalent. It's still so, it's like what insurance pays for when you need help. So there must be something to it. But for me, going and talking about my trauma doesn't help me process anything. It like sort of freezes up my ability to process information. I remember, the therapist would write down some goals we wrote down that this week I'm going to something. See, I can't even remember because when I'm dysregulated, I can't form memories. I really can't use any good thing that happened in there. And mostly I would just go in there and cry, and the distress would accelerate and amplify. The more I talked about it, the more upset I got. And good therapists tried to figure that out and make the most of it and help me. And eventually I would always just quit. I'd give it a try, 2 years here, 4 years there, 11 different therapists, but it was just the same every time. Finally, I learned. First, I learned this technique to write my fears and resentments, and it worked. And then I learned the science about why that might be. That writing about trauma and reading what you wrote to a buddy or somebody who also does this, that's something you'll learn in my course, in my free course. If you can read it to somebody, you can get relief in any time. You don't have to wait for a weekly appointment. You have relief at your fingertips. You can have this pad of paper in your purse all the time, pen and paper, just with you all the time. Folded up paper in your back pocket. You always have it. You can have it by the bed. You can have it in the car. Pull over and discharge those triggered feelings that are coming out. And that is how you can calm your triggers. So that's why I say don't keep talking about trauma, about bad memories from the past. You can use a mix of methods, part talking, but also part writing, maybe some somatic body type things. A lot of people use exercises, yoga, dance, martial arts. There are many ways to relieve your dysregulation. You can learn about those on my website at crappychildhoodfairy.com. Number 4, don't use isolation to control your triggers. A lot of us end up doing that. If it's not like complete isolation where we go off and be a hermit, we find a way to keep everybody at arm's length. Don't do that. You need other people to heal, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because if you have CPTSD, one of the most difficult things is needing people. Dealing with people and all the dynamics there can be so triggering and so expensive for us. It can cost days of dysregulation just to have a little friction with somebody. And so it's like a prison. If you end up using isolation to keep that dysregulation at bay, yes, it's a temporary fix, but so many of us have ended up isolating through years. And you know what happens when you isolate all the time? You get a little bit weird, okay? Take it from someone who knows. It's really important to stay connected to people, even though it's hard. And how you can do that is take it a little at a time. A little at a time. You don't have to throw yourself in and join this deep club that meets every day. You can do a little at a time and use short things. If connecting with people is something you need to develop a little bit, I do have a course for that, the Connection Bootcamp. So I keep plugging courses, but they're all down. I'll put all the links down there so you can find some support for that there. But you don't want to stay isolated as a way to control your triggers. What you want to do is learn to control your triggers whether you're around people or not. That's your freedom. If you know that you can control your triggers, you're going to find very quickly that you have true social mobility. You can go to a party if you want because you know if it starts to just get totally awful for you, you know what to do. You have tools to deal with it and stay, or you can leave. You don't have to get so completely jammed up and paralyzed with fear about how am I going to deal with it? I better not go. So those days are over for you now. You have freedom because you have tools, all right? Number 5, don't try to make other people control your triggers for you. All right? Don't give them that power. What you want to do instead is you control your triggers and then you have freedom to hang out with anybody you like. It's so tempting because it feels like when you are triggered and when you have PTSD, it seems so much that other people are causing the trigger. So let's say you go on a couple dates with somebody and they say they're going to call and they don't call and you go into a great big abandonment depression over it. Then when they do call a day later than they said they would call, you're raging at them. Well, and then they don't want to go out with you. What just happened there is you're making somebody else responsible for your trigger. that rage feeling or that panic or that abandonment depression that came from somebody not calling when they said they would, I totally know what it's like. It's very intense and severe. But it's CPTSD. It's not actually caused by the other person. So you could, if they would continue to see you after that behavior, which they probably might not, but if they were, it would also be tempting to say, don't ever not call when you said you were going to call. We've dated 2 times, and by now you owe me this like commitment to call when you say you're going to call. Well, it doesn't work. It's an attempt to control other people. But worst of all, it's outsourcing the responsibility to not get triggered. And no matter how much other people try not to trigger you, it ain't going to work. It's not going to happen. They can't really control whether we get triggered, because if it's not the, calling you when they said they were going to call, it's going to be something else. If you're just sitting there like a ticking time bomb of triggers, sooner or later it's going to go off. And you know what? Good, loving, healthy people, they don't want to get in trouble just for, being who they are. Nobody wants to be criticized for being who they are. So your job in dating is A, to work on your triggers and keep them calm, and then B, pay attention to the way people treat you. If somebody not calling when they say they will is a bummer for you, then maybe you don't want to go out with that person. I wouldn't go and tear them a new one over it, because you just met them. You're always going to get better results when the triggered part is something that you own and you take responsibility for. And the connecting with other people part is where you're not giving them responsibility to keep you untriggered. You can ask them to meet you halfway on things that you want in the relationship. You absolutely can. You get to have boundaries, but you don't give away the power to trigger you or not trigger you. Yes, there are a few exceptions. Let's say somebody has a spider phobia. Could they not just put tarantulas in your face? Okay, I think that's a reasonable way of saying, could you not trigger me? I have one. I have like a deal breaker thing. I say, you cannot tickle me. I was tickle tortured as a kid, to an extreme degree, and I can't stand being tickled. And I kid you not, if somebody tries to tickle me, and it's been a long time, but if they do, I can almost not control my impulse to punch, kick, to fight it like the worst thing. If anybody's close to me, they know darn well, do not tickle me, not cool. You get to have exceptions to that.